My name is Arthur Wallace, and I have seen this country collapse once before, but what I see happening now, this quiet unraveling, it scares me more. I'm 91 years old. I was just a boy, 8 years old, when the banks in our little Ohio factory town locked their doors and never opened them again. I remember the silence that fell. It wasn't a loud crash. It was a deep, heavy quiet that swallowed everything. For us, it wasn't some distant news story. It was the cold steel of the padlock on the bank's front door. It was the moment we understood that the rules we lived by had suddenly vanished. We didn't just lose our savings. We lost the very ground under our feet, the simple faith that tomorrow would provide. I thought I'd seen the worst kind of poverty, the kind that empties your stomach and your pockets. I'm beginning to realize I was wrong. I will never forget my father coming home that afternoon. He was a proud man, a machinist at the steel mill, and he never missed a day's work. But he walked in while the sun was still high, and he didn't yell, he didn't complain. He just sat down at our small kitchen table and stared at his hands. For a full hour, he said nothing, not a single word. My mother and I, we moved around him as if he were a ghost. The silence in that little room was heavier than any stone, more terrifying than any shouting match could ever be. It was the sound of a good man's world cracking right down the middle. He had done everything he was told to do, worked hard, saved every spare dollar. And in one afternoon, it was all turned to dust. That silence, the sound of his shame, became a permanent guest in our home. I'm afraid I'm starting to hear it again now. We weren't a big place, just a small Ohio town built around the steel mill. That mill was our sun. Everything revolved around it. Every morning, its whistle was our alarm clock, a deep rumbling sound you felt in your bones. The air always had a faint taste of coal and hot metal, a smell I thought was the smell of security. My father worked there, a machinist. He'd come home with grease under his fingernails and a tiredness in his shoulders, but he was proud. He was building something. We all thought we were. That mill had been there since our grandfather's time. It was as permanent as the river that ran alongside it. We believed in the simple math of our lives. You worked hard, you were honest, and the world took care of you. It wasn't a promise someone made, it was just a fact, like gravity. That's what made the fall so much worse. We didn't just fall, the ground itself fell away from under us. Our life was small, but it was solid. I remember our kitchen, the worn linoleum on the floor, the smell of my mother's baking. On that kitchen table, there was a glass jar where she kept the spare quarters. Every week, she'd empty it out and count them, her lips moving silently. It wasn't a frantic thing back then. It was a ritual of thrift, a little testament to our planning. That pile of silver was our proof that we were safe, that we had a small buffer against the world. My father would watch her, and he wouldn't say anything, but you could see the pride in his eyes. He was providing. He had built this small, warm world for us, a fortress against any trouble. He believed in that jar of coins. He believed in the strength of his own two hands. We all did. It's a strange thing to remember feeling so secure, to know how fragile it all really was. Then the whispers started. It began slowly, a change in the air you couldn't quite name. Men on street corners talking in low voices, their hats pulled down. The mill whistle started to sound different, less like a promise and more like a warning. As a boy, you don't understand the words. Words like credit and foreclosure, but you understand the fear in the adult's eyes. You feel the temperature drop. And then came the day the bank closed. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, it was a quiet click. The sound of a heavy padlock snapping shut on the big oak doors. That was it. No explanation, no one to ask. Just a piece of cold metal standing between everyone in town and their entire lives. That padlock was the first sign. It told us that the rules had been changed without our permission, that the solid ground we stood on was nothing but a thin sheet of ice, and it was cracking all around us. But the memory that truly haunts me, the one that's burned into the back of my eyes, isn't the padlock on the bank. It's smaller. It's our kitchen table with a checkered oilcloth cover that was worn thin in spots. My mother took down her quarter jar, the one she kept on the high shelf. Before, her counting the coins was a little game, a quiet celebration of our savings. But this time was different. She poured them out, and the sound they made wasn't a cheerful jingle. It was a dry, lonely rattle, a small pile of silver on a worn-out tablecloth. That was it. That was everything we had left in the world. My father stood by the window, his back to us, but I could see his reflection in the dark glass. He just stood there, watching the nothing outside, as my mother counted our entire future, one thin coin at a time. It was the moment I learned what gone really meant. I watched my mother's hands. They were always moving, always busy, but now they were slow, deliberate. She wasn't just counting, she was measuring how many loaves of bread were left in our lives, how many more days we could pretend to be okay. Her face had no expression, which was scarier than tears. It was a mask of pure, hardened will. As a boy, you don't understand economics. You don't understand why the world suddenly stops working. But you understand a look like that. You understand that the grown-ups, the people who are supposed to protect you, are just as lost as you are. And right there, a secret, silent promise took root in my 8-year-old heart. I swore to myself that I would never, ever feel that helplessness again. I would build a wall of security so high that nothing could ever touch my family. I didn't know then that a wall can also become a prison. That pile of quarters. It's funny, I think about it now when I see my family. Back then we were poor in dollars, but we were rich in something else. We had a common enemy, hunger. It made us a team. We huddled together for warmth. Now we have everything we could ever need, full pantries and warm houses, but we're counting out our words like they're the last coins we have. We spend them carefully, always trying to prove we have more than the other person. We're hoarding our rightness, our pride. I see my grandchildren arguing, their faces hard and unforgiving, and I see my mother's face at that table. It's the same look of grim accounting. They're measuring what's left between them, and I'm terrified they're going to find out there's nothing. We're facing a different kind of bankruptcy now, one of the spirit, and I fear this one is so much worse. That promise I made to myself, the one about never being helpless again, I kept it. I worked. Lord, how I worked. 60 years I spent with steel in my hands, building, saving, making sure there was always more than a handful of quarters on the table. I built a fortress of security for my wife, for my children, a good solid house, money in the bank that wouldn't just vanish. I gave them everything my father couldn't. But you know the funny thing about building a fortress? You spend so much time on the walls, you forget to live inside. I was there, but I wasn't. I'd come home tired, my mind still at the plant. I missed dinners I was sitting at. I missed conversations I was a part of. I provided, yes, but I was a ghost at my own table, just like my father was that one afternoon. I was so terrified of his silence that I ended up creating my own. And the fear, it never really goes away. It's not a loud screaming thing. It's a low hum deep in your bones. For decades, every time I heard a piece of bad news on the radio, every time a bill was a little higher than expected, I'd feel that cold knot in my stomach. I'd see that padlock on the bank door. I spent a lifetime running from my father's shame, from that feeling of having the world pulled out from under you. Now that fear is back, but it's wearing a different face. It's not about money anymore. I look at my family, at the way they look through each other, the way they build walls of silence between them over nothing. And I feel that same cracking under my feet. This is a different kind of collapse. A bank can be rebuilt, a home can be bought again, but when the trust between people breaks, I'm not sure you ever get that back. And that scares me more than any empty vault. Sometimes I lie awake at night and I wonder, did we do this? My generation, we saw the bottom, so we spent our lives trying to make sure our children never would. We taught them how to work, how to save, how to build. We gave them the comfort we only dreamed of. But maybe we forgot to teach them what the hardship taught us. We learned that you needed your neighbor. We learned that pride doesn't fill your stomach. We learned that when you have nothing, the only thing you have left is how you treat other people. Did we focus so much on filling their pantries that we forgot to teach them how to fill a table with kindness? We wanted to save them from poverty, but I'm afraid we might have just traded it for a different kind of emptiness, one that leaves you all alone in a house full of things. It all came flooding back last Sunday, not in a dream, but right here at my own dinner table, the table I bought with my wife 60 years ago, solid oak, a symbol of everything I'd built. My grandchildren were here, the two of them. They're good kids, but they started arguing. It wasn't a family squabble, it was something else. Cold. The words they used were like sharp little knives meant to cut deep. They weren't talking to each other, they were talking at each other, as if the person across the table was a complete stranger, an enemy. And when they stopped, the silence that fell in the room, it was the same silence. The same heavy, suffocating quiet that filled our little kitchen when my father came home broken. I looked at all the food on the table, the warm house around me, and I felt a chill I hadn't felt since I was 8 years old. The bank door was closing again, only this time it was between two people I love. It's a strange thing to remember. Back then, when we had nothing, we had a kind of wealth you can't put in a bank. We knew we were all in the same leaky boat. Your neighbor wasn't someone you tried to prove you were smarter than. He was the man who might have an extra potato when you didn't. I remember Mr. Henderson next door. He lost his job the same week my father's hours were cut. We didn't talk about it. One morning he just showed up and helped my father fix the hole in our roof. No words, no payment asked. It was just what you did. You shared the little you had, even if it was just your time or your strength. You looked out for each other because you understood that pride was a luxury and survival was a team sport. We disagreed on things, sure, but we knew the real fight was against the cold and the hunger, not against the person living next door. Now I look around and I see people with full pantries and warm homes acting like they're starving. Starving for what? I don't know. To be right, I suppose. We've traded humility for certainty. We've forgotten how to just listen. We're so busy building walls with our opinions that we can't see the person on the other side is just as scared as we are. That's the collapse I fear now. It isn't about money, it's about us. We survived the bank's closing because we held on to each other. But what happens when we let go of each other? What do you hold on to then? A bank can be rebuilt, a company can be reopened. But when the trust between people shatters into 1,000 pieces, I don't know how you ever put that back together. And that, more than any padlock on any door, is what keeps me up at night. That's the real poverty. After they left, I sat on the porch for a long time, the cold seeping into my old bones. And in that quiet, two memories became one. I saw my father at the kitchen table, his silence a wall of shame, and then I saw my grandchildren at my dinner table, their silence a wall of anger, and it hit me, a truth so simple and so heavy it nearly took my breath away. My whole life I had been fighting the wrong enemy. I spent 80 years fighting the ghost of financial poverty, the fear of an empty jar of quarters. But I had completely ignored this other kind of poverty, the poverty of connection. So right there on that cold porch, I made a decision. I decided to break my own silence, not to call them and lecture, not to try and fix their fight. No, I decided to call them and confess my own failure, my failure to be present. I would offer them my own vulnerability, my own regret, and see if it could build a bridge over the chasm they had dug between them. A week later, I picked up the phone and called my granddaughter. I didn't say a word about the argument, I just talked. I told her about my father, about that afternoon he came home broken, And then I told her the hardest part. I told her that I was afraid I had become him in a different way. That in my rush to give my family everything he couldn't, I had forgotten to give them the one thing that mattered, my full attention. I told her I was sorry for all the times I was there, but not really there. She was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, but 2 days later she called me back. Her voice was soft. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said, Grandpa. I called my brother." There was a pause. "We didn't solve anything," she said, "but we're talking." I listened. And in those simple words, I felt the ground become solid under my feet again. It wasn't about winning. It was never about winning. It was just about listening. So I'm going to ask you to do something. It's not easy, but it's simple. Think of one person in your life right now. A friend, a son, a daughter, a neighbor, someone you've built a wall between because of a disagreement. You know who I'm talking about. The silence between you is probably as heavy as the one that filled my father's kitchen. I'm asking you to pick up the phone. But here's the important part. Don't call to win. Don't call to relitigate the past or prove your point one last time. Just call and say, "I was thinking about you." Ask them, "How are you doing?" And then do the hardest thing of all. Be quiet and just listen. Don't prepare your defense. Don't wait for your turn to speak. Let their words be the only thing that matters for a few minutes. See what happens when you stop trying to be right and start trying to understand. I spent my whole life building things out of steel, things I thought would last, but they don't. A house can burn down, a bank can fail, a fortune can turn to dust overnight. I've seen it happen. The only thing that truly lasts, the only real security we have in this world is the trust we build between each other. One conversation at a time, one moment of grace, one decision to listen instead of shout. We survived the collapse back then because we held on to each other. That's the only way we'll survive this one. Don't make the mistake I did. Don't spend 80 years fighting the wrong kind of poverty. The real work isn't filling your pockets. It's keeping your table full of people who still know how to talk to one another. That's the only inheritance worth a damn.